Okay, bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon. I hope you've had a good time here in Ottawa.
To the week. We are meeting for one of our final meetings on the Defence Industrial Strategy, which has been a fascinating and insightful couple of months of discussions for us. We've got three witnesses with us here today. Just a friendly reminder to members and witnesses, should your earpiece not be in use, plugged in, but not on your ear, please just make sure to place it on the sticker in front of you to protect the health and well-being of our interpreters who work so hard on our behalf. Three individuals in the room with us today. From L3 Harris Canada, we have Richard Foster, the Chief Executive and Vice President. From the Canadian Corps of Commissionaires, we have Michael Langlais, the Vice President, Risk Development. And from Quantum Industry Canada, we have Lisa Lambert, the Chief Executive Officer. Witnesses, you'll each have upwards of 5 minutes. I try to be generous if you go over, but if we start getting into the 6-7 minute range, I may flag you down a little bit. Following your 5-minute introductory remarks each, there'll be a line of questioning from our colleagues around the table here, pre-assigned based on the number of seats allotted for recognized parties in the House of Commons. With that, colleagues, we will get going. Mr. Foster, I'll turn to you first for your introductory remarks. The floor is yours.
Monsieur le Président, membres du Parlement, Mesdames.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Parliament, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon.
With and promote Canadian industry to help develop a stronger defence industrial base is a welcome step. I do not believe that there has been an updated policy statement on defence to our north, strong and free, or other document that outlines Canada's ambition from a defence perspective, given the announcements on increased spending. I would expect such a document to guide how any defence industrial strategy would unfold and assume that this is being completed in parallel. One should follow the other. I have 5 recommendations on the defence industrial strategy that I believe are relevant to Canadian industry. First, the Canadian government should commit to a 20-plus year strategy that will survive election cycles. Companies need predictability in future contracts to enable corresponding investment risk and long-term viability. It is a long game with long horizons. To diversify supply chains and build up domestic capacity will take time. It took our company over 5 years to set up our factory in Katowice, Poland, as we look to compete in the European market. We cannot forget our North American defense supply chain, as it is deeply integrated with many small-medium enterprises dependent on larger primes or OEMs. Many of our suppliers have 5-plus year contracts to ensure predictability and stability. Number 2, Canada should continue to develop strategic partnerships with trusted companies that enable sovereign readiness. Sovereign, to me, means being able to defend your country when you need to, with the right equipment to meet the threat and with the right personnel trained for the mission. The right equipment does not necessarily mean it is Canadian, but rather that there is enough logistical support, spares, maintenance, knowledge to enable the equipment to be used when we decide to use it, and for it to be kept operationally relevant. To make this occur, Canada should look at certain companies to help ensure sovereign readiness. A strategic partnership is based on proven capability, trust, and demonstrated performance. A strategic partnership should last beyond the life cycle of specific equipment and enable future development of its replacement. In this way, industry and government can appropriately plan future supply chains, assist with transition planning, conduct longer-term R&D, and mitigate risk to operational capability. A strategic partnership should work both ways, where industry is welcomed into the tent, but is also prepared to open its accounting books for full transparency, while still being allowed to make reasonable profit to incentivize performance. Similarly, off-ramps for poor performance should be baked into these contracts. Number 3, Canada should always negotiate, in-service support on major equipment at the time of acquisition to include directing OEMs to use identified strategic partners and their suppliers when it is in the national interest and enables sovereign readiness. In doing so, Canada will have more leverage on the OEMs to secure the necessary access to IP and technical data. In doing so, trusted strategic partners will also help to enable Canadian supply chains to be better developed. In doing so, Canada can work with industry to better focus on the next capability to be supported, invest in R&D early, and plan for efficient transitions rather than simply holding a competition for the next platform and starting over. Number 4, Canada should identify where Canada has a competitive advantage in the global export market that supports the future defense industrial base and commit to develop it. 98% of the revenues for 2 of our Canadian companies here comes from exports. Working with industry to transparently decide where our competitive advantage lies is something that should be entrenched in the strategy. We need the government to aggressively advocate for Canadian companies like other countries that use their defense attachés, trade commissioners, and other government officials. And number 5, Canada should embed an industry-focused force development structure into the Canadian Armed Forces Requirements Organization. The CAF requirements remain a priority to ensure our men and women have the right technology to defend our sovereignty. Having a more systematic approach to force development that looks at future requirements against Canada's industrial strengths and helps identify where Canada could have a competitive advantage so that we invest early and appropriately would be of benefit. A defense industrial strategy for Canada is a long game with long horizons that will require a long-term commitment and closer engagement with industry to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Foster. Mr. Langlais, the floor will be yours for upwards of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, chers mesdames et messieurs, for this opportunity to appear as part of this extremely important study. My name is Michael Langlais. I am an executive with the Canadian Corps of Commissionaires, and I'm also the managing partner of the Resilience Fund, which is our national vehicle for making large-scale investments in Canadian small to medium-sized businesses providing critical national security capabilities. Commissionaires Canada has over 20,000 people in over 1,200 communities across Canada, including most federal government facilities and Canadian Forces bases. I am here to underscore the importance of protecting our critical infrastructure and industrial base within the context of the Defense Industrial Strategy. Defending our nation necessarily requires national security. The former is impossible without the latter. In making investment decisions for the Canadian Armed Forces, it is important to look at home as well at the vulnerabilities in our own communities using the exceptional talent pooled in Canadian small to medium-sized enterprises working in defense and in security. A greater proportion of the globe is now subject to active conflict than at any time since the Second World War. Conflict rates have doubled in the past 5 years. Between 2023 and 2024 alone, conflict event rates grew by over 25%. At the same time, hybrid warfare threats are actively probing our defenses. In 2025, drone incursions interrupted commercial flight operations in Denmark, Norway, Germany, Spain, Belgium, Sweden, and the United Kingdom, and prompted Poland to invoke Article 4 of the NATO Treaty, and the year is not yet complete. In the United States alone, 411 illegal drone incursions have been recorded near airports this year to date, forcing 11 aircraft to take evasive action. Both the Director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and the Chief of the Communications Security Establishment publicly stated at the 2025 Ottawa Conference on Security and Defense that we are under attack every single day in cyberspace, and that the volume and severity of these attacks continue to increase. While the threats in cyberspace are well known, they sit at an intersection between security and defense, public and private sectors, institutional and individual actors that is difficult to define and coordinate. These efforts must be greatly accelerated and supported by a defense industrial strategy that recognizes cyberspace as a domain of war that reaches deeper into our very homes than has ever been the case in Canadian history. Finally, our communities and critical infrastructure are physically vulnerable. CSIS has publicly stated that it has deterred lethal Iranian actions on Canadian soil and warned of Russian and Chinese espionage activities in the Arctic. The experience with the former Nortel campus starkly illustrates how pervasive the threat of technical surveillance is, really, both in industry and in government. Just this week, vital Polish rail links with Ukraine were directly targeted with explosives. To put it very bluntly, Canada and its allies are currently the target of a hybrid war that continues to escalate in the context of a level of global conflict unparalleled in 80 years. Time is of the essence. We have an exceptional pool of talent and expertise in Canada that we can deploy against these threats, concentrated in Canadian small to medium-sized enterprises that have struggled to put their skills to work in service of the public sector. Making use of these SMEs will require three things: simplified and accelerated procurement policies delegated to the lowest possible operational level, direct and continuous communication between actors in defense and public safety without fear of creating compliance issues, and clear mandates, guidelines, and instructions for resilience and business continuity measures for the private sector to follow in parallel with the government. Our allies are already being materially impacted by these threats. Let us learn from their experience. All of us in the defense and security communities, including the commissionaires, are willing to step up in service of our country. Use us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Langlais. Ms. Lambert, 5 minutes to you.
Monsieur le Président, Madame et Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair, honourable members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today.
Quantum Industry Canada, or QIC for short, the national consortium representing more than 70 quantum firms and strategic partners across the country. Our aim is to translate Canada's remarkable quantum strengths and strategic advantage into commercial success. Let me begin with something essential. Quantum isn't a single technology. It's an emerging platform that will reshape our economy, security, and defense. This platform spans sensing, communications, computing, and the enabling systems that make quantum devices possible. Together, they form the foundation of the next technological era, and defense will feel the impact first. Quantum is no longer theoretical. Some capabilities are already being deployed, others are advancing faster than expected. They're enabling entirely new ways to sense, to navigate, to secure, and to interpret the world, unlocking dual-use capabilities that today's systems simply can't match. And unlike many technologies that mature in civilian markets before reaching defense, quantum is moving in the opposite direction. Defense will be the earliest adopter because the missions demand it and the advantages are too significant to ignore. The countries that act with urgency to develop and deploy these capabilities will shape the next era of economic and strategic power. Canada enters this moment with real advantages. We recognized the quantum opportunity early, invested, built world-class institutions, trained top talent, and commercialized quantum before most countries even recognized its importance. Because of those early bets, Canada now has one of the strongest, most complete quantum ecosystems in the world. We have the second highest number of quantum SMEs globally and the highest number per capita. And our companies routinely compete against far larger, far better resource players. Quantum is an extraordinary national asset, but early leadership is not the same as lasting advantage. If we do not convert Canada's quantum strengths into deployable capability and industrial scale, that strengths will be captured elsewhere, along with the talent, IP, and the economic value that follow. The global quantum race is accelerating. Quantum is being hardwired into both defense and industrial strategies. Allies and competitors alike are standing up defense innovation units, securing supply chains, and using strategic procurement to expeditiously pull technologies into deployment. The economic stakes speak for themselves. A study referenced in Canada's National Quantum Strategy estimates quantum could contribute more than 3% of GDP by 2045, roughly the size of Canada's aerospace sector today. Global estimates run into the trillions. That value will be captured somewhere. The question is whether it will be captured here for the benefit of Canadians. Quantum's defense relevance is profound. Quantum sensing can detect what current systems cannot, including submarines beneath Arctic waters or stealth aircraft. Quantum navigation provides precise positioning without GPS, essential in contested environments. Quantum communications makes command and control harder to disrupt and easier to trust. Quantum computing will transform discovery, or materials discovery, logistics, advanced cyber operations, and complex decision-making. These capabilities will determine, quite literally, who can see first, who can act first, and who can stay secure under pressure. Which brings me to the new defense industrial strategy. The DIS is a generational opportunity, not only for military capability, but for Canada's industrial future. Canada's quantum sector is built on SMEs, fast, innovative, and globally competitive. With defense as an early partner and first customer, these firms can grow into neoprimes, next-generation integrators, and future anchor companies. But they cannot reach that scale through Canada's traditional approaches to public-private partnership and legacy defense procurement, which is built for large incumbents and moves far too slowly for frontier technologies. If the DIS is to meet its ambitions, it must create modern partnership models that let D&D and the CAF work directly with emerging industries like quantum, validating capabilities early, reducing friction, and scaling sovereign technologies at the speed of relevance. This is how Canada strengthens both prosperity and protection, by ensuring the technologies that secure us also build our economic future. Canada is unusually well positioned to do this. Through QIC, the quantum sector is already coordinated, making engagement simpler and more strategic. Quantum is at a hinge moment, and so is Canada. With the right approach, the DIS can turn Canada's early leadership into critical capabilities, an enduring advantage, while helping our homegrown SMEs grow into tomorrow's industrial champions. L'industrie quantique Canada et notre communauté sont prêtes à contribuer. Merci.
Quantum Industry Canada and our community stand ready to help you. Thank you.
We'll enter in our line of questioning. Mr. Falk, the floor will be yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming to committee this morning or this evening. Very interesting testimony. Mr. Foster, I'd like to begin with you. First of all, thank you for your service, and thank you for your presentation. My understanding is your company, L3 Harris, has the current maintenance contract for much of our air fleet here for D&D. How long have you had that contract for?
So we've been in service over 50 years. I mean, we were originally Canadair. If you know the Snowbird aircraft, that's flown by the aerobatic team in Canada. We're the original equipment manufacturer. We still hold all the drawings. We still repair it. And we have the major structural contract on the F-18 that we've done for over 40 years.
Okay. Do you know currently how much of our F-18 fleet or CF-18 fleet is currently airworthy?
I couldn't give you the specific numbers, but I believe it's probably over 80.
80%, and we currently have around 80 of them that are operational?
About 80 aircraft, yes.
Okay. How difficult was it to secure that contract?
The F-18 contract? Yeah. So we just renewed it about a year ago, and I can tell you the contractual negotiations with the government are very intense, to the point where we almost walked away because it was becoming to the point where we weren't going to make a profit. And I think that's where, when you look at a strategic partnership and a trust that we've developed with the Canadian Forces and the government over years, I think we can come to an agreement where they see the kind of profit that we're making. They can allow us to make a profit that will incentivize us to be more efficient. So it's a continual renewal and evaluation of performance.
Yeah. When there's a change order outside of regular maintenance, how difficult is it for your organization to get a change order approved?
It's not that difficult. We own we own all the IP and data rights that we bought in the 1980s, which is different than the model we use today, which is why I think it's important for Canada, when they negotiate for major equipment, to negotiate the in-service support up front to get as much IP and data rights as they can. So from a structural improvement capability, we are better than Boeing at the moment, and Boeing is looking at us to actually export some of our structural engineering capability to other F-18 fleets around the world as they sunset.
Okay, thank you. You've also been named as a strategic partner to collaborate with the Government of Canada in the F-35 Joint Program Office and also on defining requirements for the F-35 maintenance, repair, and overhaul and upgrade facility. How far along is the development of this sustainment ecosystem? Specific economic opportunities that you see, such as work packages, long-term jobs, and North American sustainment roles? And do you expect some of that to emerge in our Canadian aerospace industry?
Yes, I do. We've contacted the Joint Program Office, and this is a good example of how a strategic partnership, after it was announced last November, in 6 months, we started working directly with them to get a contract through the Joint Program Office, working with Lockheed Martin. We're at the point now where today, actually, we received the facility requirements document that outlines what is required in our facilities to upgrade it to accept an F-35. We expect that evaluation to be done at the end of March. We've entered dans les conversations avec Quebec.
We're in conversations with Quebec and Investment Quebec.
Those improvements, when I've asked the engineer that is in charge of the global sustainment for all of the depots around the world and said, what would it take to upgrade our facilities? Would it be a lot? And she said no.
Some of those upgrades have begun already, at least in Cold Lake, is my understanding.
Their infrastructure, we're not part of that. That's a separate contract direct with the Canadian Forces. But my understanding is yes, both in Bagotville is farther along than Cold Lake in developing the infrastructure for those aircraft, yes.
Okay, and in the last week or so, there's been discussions emerging about the Gripen aircraft as an alternative to the F-35. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I'm worried that the Canadian government is making a hasty decision. If we go to a mixed fleet, our concept of having a regional depot that would service not only Canadian but U.S. F-35s or NATO F-35s would be diminished. And the likelihood then of us achieving that are less, to the point where we'd probably lose about 1,600 jobs in the Quebec region. That's 500 direct, that's 1,100 indirect. On the backside of that, if they choose to go with 88 aircraft, we figure we will have about 5,000 jobs in Quebec, 1,500 direct, and 3,500 indirect over the course and sustainment of those aircraft over 20 plus years. And then if you look at the production side, you would have to ask Lockheed Martin, but my estimate, looking at the numbers across Canada, in Winnipeg, in British Columbia, that those numbers are well over 5,000 now in terms of what we're producing for the F-35.
Advice would be to stay the course.
Yes, it would.
Thank you. I think I'm out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Mr. Bardisi, floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you. Merci bien. Je vais commencer avec une.
Thank you. I'll start with a question for Ms. Lambert. The budget has put forward investments in research dedicated to the defence industry and also for quantum research. So what are the main issues at stake that could actually be for benefit the quantum industry in Canada involved in defence thanks to this investment in the budget? And what other type of funding could be set off with these investments?
Some more details about specifics within the budget. It did indicate that of the roughly $334 million that was announced for quantum under the Defence Industrial Strategy, that about a third would go to industry and 2/3 of that would go to research on that side. A bit for comparison right now, where we're looking at the rest of the globe, that's about an order of magnitude less than a lot of our comparatives in this space within it. So it's a good start to see, but to build something competitive and build off the base that we have right now, we will have to see some further investment coming forward on that side.
Thank you. A question to Mr. Longley, and happy anniversary. I know it's the 100th anniversary of the Commissionaires, so appreciate everything that the Commissionaires do across Canada, and in particular for the community here in Ottawa. One of the things that we know is that with the lots of defence defence procurement and investment, that there's a potential of replicating patterns where the beneficiaries of that investment and the people involved in that would be a higher proportion would be men than women. And so I just wanted to ask, from your perspective, especially from the workforce perspective, what are some things that this committee and the departments need to keep in mind to make sure that the investments that are being proposed have some benefit towards women?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. The question is an excellent one. There are imbalances between men and women as represented in both the security and defence industries. A focus on small to medium-sized enterprises in Canada as part of the Defence Industrial Strategy is an excellent way to be able to encourage women-owned and women-led small businesses, among which some have been represented in front of this committee in the immediate past, I believe, on behalf of their businesses, working towards creating drone capabilities in Canada. This focus on SMEs, I think, is the best way to be able to rectify at least some of that imbalance.
And maybe just a quick follow-up on that, and for Mr. Foster, a similar question will probably be coming. Our current ITB framework, how is it playing out with respect to that issue, do you think?
I have heard directly from small to medium-sized enterprises, inclusive of those that are led by women, that have experienced frustrations with being able to access the ITB framework and have characterized it as, these are not my words, Byzantine. Simplifying that as part of a wider strategy in order to encourage Canadian small to medium-sized enterprises to encourage their talent towards addressing pressing national defense and security concerns, again, is the best way to make sure that those women who uttered those words are involved in that conversation and are able to access those benefits and those offsets directly.
Thank you. A question for Mr. Foster, and thank you for your service and for your dedication to Canada through so many different parts of this work. Again, maybe just a more open-ended question about the ITB framework and what you think needs to be addressed or improved in this defense industrial policy.
So I would say that a sovereign partnership or a strategic partnership would help in that regard, because instead of going directly to ITBs, if you look at the F-35, for example, we're already looking for cybersecurity partners. We're looking for logistic partners. We're looking for hangar developments, because we see that coming, and we've made it a commitment to the Canadian government that it's not just about L3 Harris and us having all the work. It's about us looking to see who else needs to be part of this journey over the longer period. I think that would also enable us to identify where research and development should be focused, whether it's in quantum companies, whether it's in UAV companies. If competitively we look at it and say, this is where Canada is going to make a difference on the global export market, then we can work together to say, and get expertise to say, that's where we should put our development. The ITB process at the moment kind of works around the other way around. When you win a program, they say, okay, you won, now you need to go and plan how you're going to spend that money and sprinkle it around. It's very difficult for us because our company, which is very large, competes on many programs. And so for me to invest in a small slice in the maritime or in the aerospace becomes difficult. And from a business perspective, there's no incentive for me to, I'm not going to gain much out of doing that.
I want to stay on the sort of, or come back to the workforce side. And I think through your company and through the sector more generally, we've really benefited from having highly skilled aerospace mechanics and engineers and other maintenance workers. How can we best ensure that we retain these highly skilled workers and continue to develop them, regardless of the choice that's being made in this forthcoming decision on aircraft procurement?
I think Canada needs to make long-term commitments to enable predictability in the workforce. I can tell you there's some angst at L3 Harris just on all the conversation that's gone on this week in terms of, high-paid engineers going, all right, maybe it's time to go somewhere else, or maybe I should be looking somewhere else because the predictability is not there. They want to have a stable life with their families. The second thing I would say is I think Canada needs to invest more heavily in their universities and STEM programs and encourage high school students to be more educated in STEM. I think Canada is falling behind compared to other nations.
Thank you, Mr. Pardisi. Mr. Saint-Marie, 6 minutes.
6 minutes, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Salutations.
Thank you and welcome to the three witnesses. Thank you for being here and all the information that you're sharing. I've got questions for Mr. Foster, following on from Mr. Ted Falk and also Mr. Bardisi's questions. This morning in La Presse, there was a very worrying article that came out about L3 Harris with Julien Arsenault. The title was reviewing the F-35. And so this is threatening a jewel in the crown. Can you explain that to us, please? As I'd already explained, the problem for us is that if Canada decides, and I think that at the moment it's the government who will have to take this decision. I respect that, but I'm afraid that they're taking too hasty a decision. And if they decide to go with a mixed fleet, 2 fighter fleets, it's very probable that we will be forced to lay off 500 people and another 1,100 people in terms of our suppliers will be impacted. So we're saying half of the highly specialized jobs in L3 Harris in Mirabel could actually be threatened. They could lose their jobs because you do the maintenance of the F-18 that are aging. And there was a project with the order of the F-35 and the 88 to become the center of heavy maintenance for North America for all of these jets. And now with this change from the government, that would actually put expertise and jobs at risk. Yes, is the answer. That is the case. To make sure that the project is profitable, we have to have several F-35s in our facilities at one time. There's 88 medium jets. That would just mean that we just have about 5 of these F-35s in our facilities at once, and we need to have at least 17 to 22 F-35s to make this project viable for us. So we're looking for other F-35s from the US or other NATO allies to make sure that we'll have enough aircraft in our facilities at any given time. Another point I'd like to mention, I'm a simple businessman, and when I look at the figures, there are 3,400 F-35s that are going to be built throughout the world and divided up between 14 NATO countries. And when we talk about the Gripen jets, we're talking about 2 NATO countries, namely Sweden and Hungary. So in terms of production, we estimate there will be just 200 or 300 in the world total in the future of these Gripen jets. So as a simple businessman, there's a more interesting opportunity with the F-35s. Now, in this article, it said last June, the chief of Jenny Carignan said that replacing the F-35s by possibly a mixed fleet is a questionable point. So what do you think about Canada pursuing a mixed fleet? I think that will be difficult because we will have to train 2 types of pilots, 2 types of technicians, and 2 different types of infrastructures on the military bases. So that will be very costly for Canada. And in terms of operations, I can tell you that for NATO operations, we do the operations or we participate in operations. If we've got F-35s, we will be part of those NATO operations, as I experienced a long time ago with the F-18s. Whereas if we have a different type of jet, then we'll just participate in the behind the scene, and we won't really be in the forefront of the operations. Thank you. In your presentation, you really underlined the importance of predictability and stability with long-term contracts that go beyond political cycles. And we finally had a commitment for the number of F-35 jets, and now the current government is reviewing all of this. So what type of message is that sending to the industry? Now, I respect the fact that the government wants to review their decision, but for us, this is a cause for concern because we need predictability. We need to have something solid to make sure that operations can continue and we can continue to do business. Thank you. I've understood that. I think I've got about 1 minute left. Yesterday, Radio-Canada or the CBC cited the industry minister who was saying Saab is offering 10,000 jobs to Canada if we go for the grip and jet. How would you react to that? And where do you think these jobs will be? You've talked about direct and indirect jobs earlier for the F-35s. How could you compare that with the Gripen? I know that Saab, when they were wanting to compete, they said 6,000 back in 2022, and now it's 10,000. We're talking about support and on the production side. So is it 5,000, 5,000? I don't know what the split will be, but in terms of production, it will only last 3 to 5 years. Perhaps we're talking about 50 aircraft, perhaps 100, but it won't last for a long time. So the number of jobs in terms of production will not last for that long compared to the F-35s, where they're going to be built. Well, they're up to 1,000, and we imagine there's going to be another 2,000 still to be built as well with the F-35s. Thank you very much, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Thank you to the witnesses for your opening testimonies. Ms. Lambert, I'd like to start with you because I believe the quantum platforms of technology is not only super important to industry, but also critical to our national security. Now, budget 2025, it sets aside $334 million over 5 years under the Defense Industrial Strategy for Quantum, starting in 2025, 2026. In a previous statement, you said this is a meaningful step, but outcomes will depend on commercialization, scale, and program design. From some of your previous statements, you highlighted 3 gaps. The first one being a refreshed industry-led quantum strategy. Second, a procurement pathway that moves lab results to real purchases, and C, enough scale to anchor manufacturing and engineering here in Canada. Is that the right shortlist?
It's a good shortlist, yeah.
So what changes would an industry-led refresh of the national quantum strategy need, and what risks do we face if we delay, say, a year or two?
I think to consider the context that the original NQS came out in, it was quite a different world just 3 years ago at that time, and the development of the National Quantum Strategy, or NQS at that time, was very much led by research in that world. Since then, things have rapidly shifted over to industrialization, and that's the focus we need to give this around what is needed for industrialization. That's more than just commercialization, and Canada is one of the few countries in the world with quantum capabilities. We're one of even fewer countries in the world that has the capabilities or the foundations to have manufacturing of quantum capabilities here. If you think in the context of Taiwan and what transformed that economy, it was the manufacturing and the industrialization of semiconductors. That's the potential that can be here in Canada. We've got incredible foundations. If we look over in Quebec with the microelectronics and the photonics sector that's over there, we look at CPFC, which is, there's talks about that right now, about refarming in some other areas. Those are some key elements that we could be looking at moving forward. And I think having a conversation with our industry that's here today and the team, the complement that we have, and where we can build on their strengths. We can't do everything, and I don't think we should be, but we should look at building what we have and really centering around where the puck is going for this, and that's really in the industry space with research coming in to support that. It's not that we've solved all the science challenges to go forward. We do need research involved, but it needs to be from an industry-led perspective. So
some of the venture capital measures in Budget 2025 only begin in 2026 and 2027 and beyond. Now, the quantum line starts in 2025, 2026. So just wondering if sort of the timing gap causes any acute issues, and like what should be on our radar with the timing gap between the two mechanisms for funding?
Urgency needs to be on the timing gap. Every day I see new announcements coming out from our allies and our adversaries alike about how much they're prioritizing quantum. Just today, there was a U.S. Commission on China that put forward a quantum-first national goal by the year 2030. This is something that will have ripple effects across the globe, and it will really start showing who is not putting forward demand signals now for this. And we see different countries who are actively reaching into their ecosystems to pull capabilities forward to deployment because they are so valuable. And having those as sovereign capabilities are so valuable to those nations as well, because this really is going to be the next technology platform that's pervasive in everything that we do.
So you've also noted that our current scale in Budget 2025 appears well below our peer countries, something you just mentioned a moment ago. So what does scale mean in practical terms for Canada over, say, the next 5 years? And how should government express that scale in a multi-year planning strategy?
I think a multi-year planning strategy would be really helpful to have forward, and I think to set a vision of, and I would look at, a 5 or 10 year vision for this, where we're looking at where are we actually seeking to go with this, and then we can go back and say what would have to be true and plan our investments accordingly. With a number, I can give a range within that, but we can qualify that range quite easily, and we could also de-risk that range considerably as well. What we do in quantum, if we point things towards quantum with advanced manufacturing, it will also benefit what we call classical capabilities or conventional technologies as well, and help us be at the front edge with that. So if we go and aim towards quantum, we'll actually pull all of our frontier technology sector forward together. It will benefit AI, it will benefit photonics, it will benefit our semiconductor capabilities as well. So it can be a really smart, holistic investment that comes together on this side, but some thoughtful planning would be really helpful.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Gugelmin. Madame Akan, 5 minutes.
Merci, Mr. Chair. Mr. Forster, in my riding of Oakville West, we have several advanced aerospace manufacturers. So from your perspective, how does concentrating specialist manufacturing in specific regions strengthen the integrated supply chain and create economies of scale?
I didn't quite get the full, could you just repeat that question? Sorry.
So from your perspective, do you see the value of having concentrated specialist manufacturing in certain regions? Would that help to strengthen the integrated supply chain and create economies around the area?
I think it does, and we've seen that in Montreal, and I think we've seen that in Ontario as well, and in that cluster, in the OAS, we work with them often. So I think you just save time, and you have a lot of synergy with the industry working together in a close region.
So, thank you. Building on that, a skilled workforce is also critical for scaling these operations. So could concentrating manufacturing plants geographically help also maintain a robust pool of trained experts and professionals?
Of course. I think the relationship with business and universities, for example, I know we do that in WestCam, where we actually recruit from Mohawk College on a regular basis. I think that really helps in terms of incentivizing students to learn early and to create that community involvement where businesses are working to incentivize new talent.
Mr. Foster. Ms. Lambert, as we are just discussing about the budget 2025 that introduced significant funding for quantum technologies, and the government is also preparing to launch Canada's first defense industrial strategy later this year. So from your answer regarding the urgency of the funding, I understand that you're also happy that we were able to pass the budget and we don't go to the polls during the Christmas, which was money saving and time saving. So from an engineering perspective, how do you assess these initiatives in terms of positioning Canada as a leader in quantum technologies for defense and dual-use applications? Also, within this strategy, do you see the role of quantum engineering evolving, particularly in developing the talent, infrastructure, and technical capabilities needed for the industrial scale development?
Just so I can understand the question, can you share what you mean by quantum engineering?
So do you assess the initiatives that is coming with the budget in terms of positioning Canada as a leader of quantum technologies for defense and dual-use applications?
I think seeing quantum recognized under the Defense Industrial Strategy was something we were very happy to see, and that's something where you look at all other leading countries in this space, they're driving this forward from a defense side. So it's a very good first step to see, and we're very encouraged within that. As I mentioned before, where we look at the scales of investment, there is a bit of a mismatch here when we look at our global peers in this, and it is something that there is a cost to do this. A lot of this is the deepest of deep tech. It is hardware intensive for some of it, and we do have these hardware strengths, which is something that I really hope Canada can keep, because there's a lot of value with it, and it will underpin systems globally on that side. But seeing the direction of this move under defense, I think is a very encouraging signal.
What specific initiatives should the DIS implement to develop and retain skilled engineers and technical professionals in quantum technologies, ensuring Canada has the workforce to support industrial scale development and deployment?
I think a big part to retain the people that we have here is for them to see a future here in the sector, and this is to see a growing and thriving sector. So supporting our SMEs and seeing them and giving them the supports that they need to become anchor companies to scale up and grow is a key part of that. That's going to involve procurement. That's going to involve having some predictability and some demand signals going forward. Those are some things that we can move towards in having all the conditions that are needed to industrialize and grow a sector from a nascent state.
Thank you very much. Do I have time, Mr. Chair?
45.
I can just skip. Thank you.
Merci. Monsieur Saint-Marie, 2 minutes, 30 secondes.
Merci,
Thank you, Chair. Still for Mr. Foster, please. With the aging fleet of the CF-18s, there'll be less and less maintenance to do on them. You have a structural project which is to be the centre of maintenance for the North America for the F-35s, which means there could be additional jobs. If you didn't have this project, given the government's possible choices towards the Gripen rather than the F-35, the F-35, there wouldn't be any structural project for these maintenance jobs. We're talking about possible loss of 500 jobs, and if the government goes ahead, then there could be additional hires instead. Is that right? Yes, that would be the case. As we've said, we're planning to have 1,500 people employed if Canada decides to go ahead with 88 F-35s, another 3,500 jobs amongst our suppliers. And we're already looking at how to work with the suppliers, in particular in Quebec for cybersecurity and the logistics involved with the F-35s and also the infrastructure that we would have to build, as well as looking at other aspects. Thank you. Question. Your decision to modify your facilities to be able to do the maintenance work on F-35s. Well, you've said you're undertaking studies on this subject, but it will depend on the decision from the government. So you have to wait for the government's decision. Is that right? We are continuing still with our study. We've just received documents from Lockheed Martin, from the company in charge of this for the F-35s in the US, and we want to have the study completed by the end of March, and that will identify the costs associated with funding to upgrade our facilities. The fact that we've already got structures there with quite high security for the F-18s means that it will be less costs involved. So it will be a win-win economic decision for companies and also to keep costs down because you've already got that site up and running. So we have to ask the government to render its decision before March 2026 because you've got your studies currently underway. Yes, that would really help so that we could increase predictability. Unfortunately, Mr. Saint-Marie, it's a shame I had lots of other questions, but thank you to all three of you. It was pretty close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Lambert, from your perspective, what's still missing in Canada's approach to move quantum from lab outcomes to consistent purchases and field use? And how should responsibilities be divided between multiple departments so that handoffs don't stall projects?
It's a really good question with it. I think one thing is missing, and I touched on it before, is having clear demand signals. As I mentioned, this is going to be a defense-first applications in most contexts, so knowing what the capabilities are that the CAF and D&D are going to need would really help. This is tough to do for emerging technologies. It's kind of, you go back to the 1900s and you're asking people, what they would want. They would say a faster horse. They wouldn't ask for a car or know they could get a Ferrari in this case, so we need to figure out some new ways to do this. The traditional way of working with requirements doesn't tend to work very well for frontier technologies. They move too quickly, so having challenges can work with that. And I also think it would be encouraging for Canada to put forward a concrete mission, something like Canada being one of the best in the world for deploying quantum and frontier technologies for Arctic and maritime conditions, something that aligns very much with our geography and what our needs are, would be helpful on that side. The other thing, too, is looking at the industrialization piece, having an advanced manufacturing strategy. to look at what would be needed to build this out. This could be done in collaboration with industry and aligning it with what their needs are, and would help look at how do we build this ecosystem out. These are things that are going to take time as well, and it would help them with their planning and their predictability as they're moving forward. It would also give confidence to investors and help crowd in some private capital into this space to help accelerate it forward.
In a Globe and Mail op-ed you argued that Canada must industrialize quantum by building fabrication, integration, secure supply chains, and deployment at scale, not just funding research. Can you expand a little bit on your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think this is something that's needed even more urgently right now. We're seeing this in other areas. The U.S. has an advanced manufacturing strategy. Europe is developing its advanced manufacturing strategy. We're seeing this across Asia as well. It's something that's lacking here. And it's something, again, that we're moving from a research space into, for a lot of these companies, it's a manufacturing game for them going forward. And how do we go and build this out is also integral to introduce us and to integrate us into global value chains. No one company, let alone one country, is going to be able to do quantum all on their own. It's too complex than that. It's supply chains, not just a supply chain for quantum. They're still emerging, and they're more complex than semiconductors. So having those plans also allows us to negotiate and partner with allies and figure out what parts of the ecosystem or which parts of the supply chain are we going to own, are we going to specialize in, and then we can be cooperating with our allies better in this space.
Thank you. Mr. Foster, you spent some time talking about the F-35s here, and you've warned previously that anything less than 88 F-35s or a mixed fleet will put Canadian jobs at risk, and I think you've highlighted that quite well here. Now, yesterday, Minister Jolie had said Canada didn't get enough industrial benefits from the F-35 procurement and wants more jobs created, which is why they're looking at going a different way. I was just wondering if you could expand on your thoughts a little bit further on that.
Well, from my understanding, the competition for the F-35 was done a little differently, and I know that Lockheed Martin, came up with a different way of doing the ITB process and still won. And I know that our Canadian companies around Canada have competed and won the right to produce products for the F-35, and we continue to compete. If Canada was to decide to go to another fleet, when those competitions come up for renewal, I would be afraid that we'll probably lose more jobs on the production side. So
what can you briefly define, like what role is L3 Harris was going to play in the planned F-35 center at Mirabel?
So we believe that Canada needs a sovereign capability for its F-35s to make sure that, like I said in my remarks, that when you need an F-35 to do an operational mission, it's ready. And we've done that for over 40 years for the F-18. We're part of the team that ensures that when you need an F-18, it's ready to go. If you don't have that depot, then that means you're reliant on another depot in another country to make sure your F-18 gets the service it needs.
If the government delays or reopens parts of the fighter plan, how long do you think that pushback, or it could push back the start of the full rollout in operation at Mirabel Sustainment Center? And what does that mean for the CF-18 transition, for instance?
Well, I guess we could always keep the F-18 going longer. We've got the structural capability to do that, and it's certainly as capable as a Gripen. I think in the longer term, the longer we wait, we're think that the Americans are getting at capacity in their two depots, and we're offering the flexibility for the U.S. specifically to have an overflow capability to put their F-35s in our facility. At the same time, Canada provides a national sovereign readiness capability for our own F-35s.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gugelman. Okay, Madame O'Rourke, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my time with my colleague. It's helpful to hear how urgent this defense spending is, the investments in SHRED, the acceleration in manufacturing, and from my perspective, how essential it is to pass the budget, and then the implementation measures, because we are hearing Canada is a target in a hybrid war that's unparalleled in 80 years. So I think we need to hear that urgency and hear the solutions that you're bringing to us. And it's interesting that the colleagues opposite are actually saying we should be spending more. So I tend to agree. I just want to come back to, Mr. Langlais, your comment about small and medium enterprise. I'm curious if you are familiar The Americans have a program called the WOSB, which is women and women ownership or economically disadvantaged women-owned small business. The U.S. military has a specific procurement stream for them, and they also have what's called APEX accelerators. So are you familiar with the program? It allows for separate procurement and for women-owned businesses, or it could be in Canada, Indigenous-owned businesses, to bid on smaller contracts. So the big stuff continues to happen, and then if those aren't successfully bid on, it goes back to the larger pool. Are you familiar with that? Would you support that? And then would you support the context, the concept of the APEX accelerators that actually help businesses procure to the Defense Department in the States?
Thank you for the question. I am generally familiar with it. You may have noticed I borrowed some terminology from it. I am not familiar enough in detail to speak to its details, but I believe similar programs would be beneficial in Canada, with a note of caution that we must focus on the capabilities first, given the urgency of the requirements that have been expressed and the spending that must be accomplished. Accomplishing these things in parallel, I believe, is possible, but letting one hamper the other, I believe, is a risk that must be carefully guarded against.
That's fair. Mr. Baines?
Thank you. Thank you to my colleague there and to our witnesses. Thank you for joining us. I'm not sure how much time I'll have to maybe get to everyone, but my first question is to Ms. Lambert. There's been significant investments into quantum computing in University of British Columbia, my home province, and I wanted to get your thoughts on. I'm not sure we talked about the commercializing of it, and what would you recommend government do to help scale the quantum computing sector so we can effectively commercialize on the R&D?
Thank you. I'm also live in BC, so appreciate what's happening over there. And it was actually the global quantum industry was launched in British Columbia, which is an incredible achievement to see. It was back in 1999 when D-Wave was founded, and the global quantum software industry was also founded in Vancouver with 1QBit back in 2012. I think a first piece to look at is quantum computing. Quantum technologies is much bigger than quantum computing. There's a whole platform within them, and they do reinforce each other in some of the developments with it. So when we look at quantum research, I would really suggest we look at quantum technologies broadly and encouraging development and investment across that side of it. There's still more work to do on the research front, and I think right now some of the academics can be targeting research areas that would support the acceleration of our industry, recognizing that we're in a global race for this as well, and where they could be trying to get 2 steps ahead of where our industry is, and solving some of those big challenges would be really helpful in that context if we were all pulling together towards a mission-led strategy and ensuring that research isn't trying to outcompete our own industry, which isn't happening intentionally, but can be a piece where I think if we really want to put forward a national quantum strategy and pull together, we all need to be working from the same mission-led approach.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I'm going to go into the rise of agentic AI. Maybe stick with you on this one. We see it's transforming the threat of the cyber threat landscape. Maybe if you can give us an idea on how we can use quantum computing to support the public safety authorities' efforts to counter cyber attacks.
I recently co-authored an op-ed actually that mentioned agentic AI and AI and the emerging cyber threats that are happening and where quantum plays into it. I'm happy to share that and follow up more on that side. What I will say is quantum and AI are different technologies that will converge, and we are seeing a lot of emerging cyber threats right now. With quantum computing, we will get to a point, and there's predictions around the timeline for this coming sooner than originally anticipated, where we're going to get to something called a cryptographically relevant quantum computer. And this is going to be a device that will be able to walk through most of the conventional cryptography that we use today. This is the threat we know is coming. We have solutions against this, many of them actually pioneered in Canada and available today on that side. What we need to do is ensure that all of our critical infrastructure, all of our government systems, all of our private sector is quantum safe and ready for that potential threat to come. But we need to do more than that. We also need to ensure that we're cyber resilient on that front as well, so that if we do face an attack, we're able to quickly move to another system or have defenses in place. And this will help protect against potential threats like agentic AI, like quantum computing, or other threats that are coming. And we need to take a posture right now. I would suggest that we're actually anticipating that we will face technical surprise and that we're able to respond and not be dead in the water when that happens. This is a really serious thing that we need to get a move on because, I mean, our entire economy is built on the backbone of the digital world. So if this is attacked and this is a targeted threat, it would undercut everything.
Thank you for your time.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, witnesses, for availing yourselves today and contributing to the insight of this study and providing us with some guidance. Colleagues, we're going to do a strict 5-minute suspension here. We're going to get right back at it. going to continue with the second hour of our study here. We've got two witnesses in the room with us as well as one online. I want to welcome from my hometown, from the University of Manitoba, James Ferguson, a Senior Research Fellow, Centre for Defence and Security Studies. Welcome, Mr. Ferguson. We'll talk about home after the meeting here. From the University of Calgary, we have Robert Hubert, Professor, Centre for Military Security and Strategic Studies. Welcome, Professor, who's joining us virtually. And from H2 Analytics, we have Hugo Hodgett, who is here with us today. So, witnesses, you will have upwards of 5 minutes each for introductory comments. For those in the room, ask that if your earpiece is plugged in but not on your ear, that you just place it on the sticker in front of you. With that, we're going to get right into things, and I will just confirm that those that are joining us virtually have had their earpieces and their headphones tested and verified by our admin here. Thank you very much. Merci. With that, Mr. Ferguson, you get hometown advantage from my perspective, so you're going to go first. 5 minutes for you, sir.
Good. Thank you. Good afternoon. Well, I had hoped that the government's defense industrial strategy would have been released by now. I shall direct my brief comments to some critical observations vital to a defense industrial strategy. First, the strategy must be premised upon a detailed, systematic, empirical map of the global defense industrial environment. As Canada purchases the overwhelming majority of its major weapon systems and platforms from foreign defense primes, this environment significantly determines the possible and the optional. Further, this environment is not monolithic. Instead, there are significant variants across defense industrial sectors: air, land, maritime, space, and cyber. Thus, a single defense industrial strategy, a one-size-fits-all, is problematic. Canada needs multiple strategies to fit for the different sectors. Second, the strategy must be premised on a realistic, systematic understanding of existing Canadian defense industrial capacity. Overall, this resides in the second tier of defense production, component or subsystem suppliers. Although evidence is limited, a significant portion is foreign-owned and especially American-owned. Systematic knowledge, despite attempts by government over time, is in relative short supply. Companies, for a variety of reasons, are reluctant to disclose proprietary information, compounded by the definition of what is and is not a defense company. Nonetheless, it has long been the case that successful Canadian companies depend upon accessing the global marketplace. This is critical, especially in the context of offsets, industrial and technological benefits. In seeking primes to commit ideally 100% of contract value in Canada. In reality, however, no companies provide 100% offsets. Instead, the government employs an economic multiplier relative to investments. No company would stay in business if it signed a contract for $1 million and then it was expected to give the $1 million back to the consumer. Even so, this does translate to the establishment of prime subsidiaries in Canada and engagement with Canadian companies directly related to the defense product. However, whether these commitments translate beyond the immediate purchase is an open question. While government does track offset commitments, serious questions should be asked whether Canadian offset programs over, say, the past 40 years provided significant returns on our defense acquisition investments and whether these investments have contributed to a sustainable defense industrial base. Unless subsidiaries in Canadian companies become fully integrated into the prime supply chain beyond the specific purpose or obtain license to compete in the global marketplace, these companies become dependent on Canadian defense capital spending, with a variety of economic and political implications. While today, as a function of their unparalleled level of planned defense capital spending, this may prove relatively unproblematic. But it won't last forever, and Canada will find the capacity produced today will only be short-term. All governments seek domestic returns via offsets, which constrain global market access, which primes must respond, which reduces their willingness to provide a global license, especially in terms of technology transfer. In many cases, due to intellectual propriety and related corporate interests, offset commitments can simply amount to build-to-print work with little or no technology transfer. In addition, offsets significantly increase procurement costs estimated by some at roughly 20%. The degree to which these factors are present in the case of directed purchase employing national security exemptions, especially in government-to-government purchases, is a difficult question as well. Finally, as a function of broader economic reality and the defense production sharing agreements with the United States, the Canadian defense environment is integrated with the United States defense industrial and technological base. And also, and this cannot be overstated, the U.S. remains by far the largest, most technologically sophisticated military market in the world, and this is unlikely to change dramatically over the next 10 to 20 years. Current politics surrounding Canada's relation with the United States, along with misperceptions of U.S. defense reliability, has brought diversification back with indications through a variety of agreements with Europe and the Asia-Pacific partners of defense for diversification. The implications of attempting to go down this path are major. Unless Europe and Asia-Pacific partners are willing to provide direct access to the procurement markets, the aforementioned offset dynamic will remain in place. To conclude, one recent example of success and a model for a viable strategy is the F-35 consortium. Canadian companies involved, as long as they remain competitive per se, have obtained access to the global F-35 market of over 2,500 platforms, the largest fighter production in the world. There are numerous other considerations related to Canadian defense industrial strategy, including overhaul and maintenance contracts and research and development investments that need to be considered in the complicated world of defense. But in the end, economic investment drivers should not undermine providing the Canadian Armed Forces with the best and most advanced capabilities. I look forward to expanding on these observations and answering other questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Professor Hodgett, we'll go to you next for 5 minutes.
Good evening, and thank you to the chair and the members of the committee for inviting me. My name is Hugo Hodgett. I am the CEO of H2 Analytics, and I am a Canadian Armed Forces veteran. H2 Analytics is an Ottawa-based technology company that has been supporting the Canadian Forces, the RCMP, federal departments, and Canada's allies abroad. We've been supporting the CAF since approximately 2018, giving us a clear view into what accelerates and what slows the development of Canadian defense capability. We all know that the global environment is becoming more uncertain, and many of my colleagues have talked at length about this in previous appearances. I want to focus on a topic that will provide direct recommendations that can influence the committee's recommendations against the structural barriers that are preventing Canadian defense-focused innovators from becoming globally competitive. To build real defense technology ecosystem in Canada, 3 pillars must be aligned: the innovators, the Crown, and capital providers. Today, these pillars are not aligned, creating unnecessary friction, most acutely felt by CAF end users and for innovators building the capabilities that they need. Central to the problem, as has been pointed out time and time again, is the institutional risk aversion that's embedded within our procurement system. Small, innovative firms simply cannot survive, let alone scale, when forced to navigate a drawn-out process and Byzantine maze of rules that ultimately produce contracts of uncertain duration and uncertain value. The lack of predictability suppresses investor confidence, making capital providers hesitant to fund defense innovators. In many cases, this pushes companies towards foreign capital, where risk tolerance is higher, often resulting in intellectual property leaving Canada. Canada has world-class talent in defense technology and is respected globally for its ability to produce novel, high-impact capabilities. Yet at home, Canadian firms struggle to attract capital required to scale, mature their products, and enter export markets. If Canada intends to be a net exporter of defense technology, innovators and the Crown cannot achieve this alone. Canadian companies will require both public and private capital in order to grow, commercialize IP, and expand globally. So what can the Crown do to encourage capital formation with minimal additional cost, time, and process that will enable small and medium businesses to take advantage of it? The first is prioritize a shift to multi-year contracts as the norm for early-stage innovators, giving both companies and investors the predictable revenue signals that they need, that the Crown intends to see procurement through, and rest assured the Crown retains all of the capabilities it needs to cancel contracts for underperforming companies. Apply national security exemptions more readily to innovation contracts, recognizing that a resilient domestic defense industrial base is itself a national security interest and warrants streamlined procurement. This will bias Canadian firms and provide much-needed revenue to Canadian innovators so that they can seek domestic rather than foreign capital. And finally, review and modernize Treasury Board guidance on delegated and sole source authorities, increasing the dollar thresholds and pushing decision-making as low as practical so that military end users can more directly influence timely procurement of capabilities they need. Innovators and end users are best placed to identify and fill gaps within military capabilities, and addition of bureaucratic steps results in an invisible tax on business and a failure to feed capabilities quickly. The overarching point is this: innovators cannot grow and scale domestically or internationally if the Crown is not a consistent, reliable customer. When the Crown signals commitment through revenue to companies, capital flows into those companies, allowing job growth, international expansion, exports, and high technology to be built in Canada. Canada already has world-class defense innovators. Our reputation abroad is strong, but built on the determination of innovators working around systemic friction at home. The scaffolding is in place for a robust defense technology ecosystem that delivers Canadian IP, high-skilled jobs, and global influence. Innovators are doing their part, and with targeted action on behalf of the Crown and properly aligned incentives for capital providers, Canada can truly build a world-class defense ecosystem. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks very much, Mr. Hodgett. I was wondering why you gave me a perplexed look when I called you professor, and then I realized that I was looking at Mr. Hubert. So congratulations on the PhD that you earned here this evening. Professor Hubert, you have not lost your PhD, so we'll go to you now from the University of Calgary for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this opportunity to talk. And I would also point out that I'm not actually also a born and raised Winnipegger. In fact, Dr. Ferguson and me both did our undergraduate together, just once again to sort of Winnipeg element.
Take as much time as you need then.
I figured that would happen. Well, thank you. I have 3 major points to make in terms of the defense industrial strategy. The first one is that despite efforts to try to portray any form of strategy or any type of policy that the Canadian government over time has tried to develop when it comes to industrial strategy pertaining to defense, it is an inherently political process and not a technical economic process. You can come up with the very best design of how to allegedly streamline the process, how to ensure that the process is in fact working to the best of your ability, but ultimately it is the decision of the Prime Minister who ultimately determines how well or how badly the system ultimately works for the development of our defense capabilities. We know of the good examples where things have in fact happened very quickly, where we've been able to receive a weapon system of very sufficient and sophisticated capability. And I'm referring to the C-17 decision in terms of how fast we can actually move on decisions of defense and what it means for the obviously following defense, the industrial capabilities. And we can also, for an example where it was done very poorly, we can think about the efforts to replace the Kingfishers for the Canadian Navy in terms of their helicopter replacement. The second point that flows from the inherent political nature of any defense industrial strategy is the fact that the almost complete placement of this strategy is almost entirely focused on economics and not on strategic considerations. We see this again through the various examples. My colleague, Dr. Ferguson, made several references to the F-35. And we can compare ourselves to the manner in which all of our Nordic allies, in fact, went through the process of making the decision for the F-35 with various types of different type of industrial defense strategy, and that includes the Norwegians, the Finns, the Danes, the Brits, and the Dutch, and the manner by which they were able to move very quickly, the Danes in particular, for example, of being able to achieve it. If we look closely at their industrial defense strategy, despite being close to Sweden, and one would think that they would have a relationship that would be closer to them, we see that one of the driving features for their industrial strategies were strategic considerations. That is, how did they have to have the best fighter for responding to what they saw as the growing Russian threat? The third point that follows from this is, of course, is that we do have examples where we've attempted to come up with a coherent defense industrial policy or something similar to it. The example, of course, that probably stands out the most is the Canadian shipbuilding strategy. That, of course, was created and finalized back in 2011. So there's been a significant period of time that we can have an evaluation of how well or how badly it has been implemented. One of the key drivers of that industrial defense strategy was to break what was usually referred to as a boom and bust cycle in Canadian defense production. And so we've always understood that Canada has always had this difficulty. We tend to build and buy very large and very sophisticated defense systems all at once, which then creates all sorts of problems in terms of maintenance and their replacements. Now, again, when we think about the boom and bust that the Canadian shipbuilding strategy as an industrial defense strategy was trying to break, it was trying to ensure that the construction of both naval and Coast Guard vessels was done on an ongoing basis. Right now, even though that the decision was made to make new icebreakers as far back as September 10th, 1985, we are now building 4 big icebreakers all at the same time. And I'm including, of course, when I say icebreakers, the 2 AOPs that are included. We have one that is being built in Vancouver, one that is going to be built in Finland and in Quebec. And as a result, we have just determined, even though we know better, a complete repeat of the boom and bust cycle. And so, therefore, we're left with this realization that no matter how much we try to rearrange the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic, we have to first of all realize that this is a political process. We can talk about a rational system all we want. It will determine what the Prime Minister wants to be moving on these issues. Second of all, we cannot lose sight that ultimately when we are buying defensive systems, we are trying to defend Canada's in an increasingly dangerous international security environment. It's not about getting the best buck, I dare say. It is about ensuring that we have the best weapon systems to defend Canadian, to ensure that deterrence is maintained, and if deterrence breaks down, that we are able to fight and defend Canadians, not make the best dollars. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, witnesses, for your introductory remarks. I will note as we go to the first line of questioning here, notwithstanding the fact that Mr. Falk is a Manitoban, I did not choose that he gets to go first. Mr. Falk, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses that have testified here in the second hour of committee. And Mr. Ferguson, I will start with you. And first of all, I'd like to just say that Raquel Dancho is I'm sure very sorry that she's not here. She was looking forward to being able to question you here at committee. So she fell ill today and unable to attend. So
give her my best.
We will do that. You have previously given testimony to Foreign Affairs that you emphasize the importance of pragmatic, rational decision-making over emotionally driven choices. Considering the recent developments, such as the delays in the F-35 and the talks with Gripen, do you think these decisions are being based on a pragmatic basis?
To be blunt, not at all. This is emotional, virulent nationalism in Canada, responding to statements by the President of the United States. We've gone down this path. The F-35 purchase should have been done 15 years ago when it was started by the Harper government, and then it got derailed, and it was stalled and stalled and stalled. If you look at the fighter aircraft production environment for the Allied world and others, the F-35, that was really the only choice. And as my colleagues have pointed out here, you look at the list of countries who are all involved in the consortium, and that is, I think, the model. And we had that going, I would just add, back in the 1990s with the replacement of the Sea King, which fell apart as well, which cost us companies. This is our only option. To make a decision, I could go at length why this would be a disastrous decision, from having two supply chains, two training chains, two sets of infrastructure that has to be equipped, maintained, and spent, notwithstanding exactly what the Gripen company, and by the way, it's not a Swedish company, it's British Aerospace owns this company. So remember that. Besides that, what, we're going to assemble it? That's what we're going to do? Assemble 73, if I take 88 as the number, with 15 F-35s. We're going to assemble them here. That's what we call a screwdriver plant. There's no technology. There's no advancement, period. Even if we go to a broader market for the Gripen, which is a market of hundreds, if that. It's not the market the F-35's in. And there are a variety of other reasons that this has just become emotional nationalism and has been wrapped up in diversification of general economic patterns for Canada. And I would remind everyone, we've done this before. How well has it worked out for us? It hasn't. So my answer is very simple. This has got to stop, and my colleague, Dr. Hubert, made this point as well. This is political beyond the realities, and I'm not one who criticizes political involvement. These are taxpayers' money. The government is responsible and accountable for this. So the politics have to play here. But when politics become emotional, nationalist-driven, with no insight into the reality of the marketplace, then we are heading down a path we've been on many times before, and didn't work out then, and it's not going to work out now.
From an ITV perspective, right now the F-35 seems to be a clear choice, with the tail assemblies being manufactured at Magellan in our home province of Manitoba. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of ITBs associated with any other considerations.
It's difficult to know. As far as I know, this is what's in the public domain. Saab has offered assembly here. It's going to marry itself with Bombardier, which is an interesting question, which goes back a long history of the Bombardier relationship on these things. To assemble it, fine. Exactly what access do we get to the market, the limited global market for the Gripen, besides that? What technology transfers we're going to get? And we have to remember, for all major corporations, companies, technology is the key, intellectual property is the key thing for them. They're not giving this away unless you're willing to pay a lot of money for it. And even then, they're not going to enable you, Canadian companies, who get technology transferred to them, they're not going to allow you to go on the global marketplace.
Just for a moment.
Yep.
And thank you for that. I think that's very important for this committee and for the government to hear that. You have been very critical of the DIA, the Defense or the
Defense Investment Agency. Yes.
Do you still hold that position?
Well, I do intuitively. And I'll be honest, I don't know. I haven't seen any details of this. I don't know if who I call the czar has testified to the National Defense Committee or this committee about how this is going to do. But if we think with a defense investment agency that somehow we are going to throw out, as my colleague said here, as much as I agree with his point, we're going to throw out all the procurement competitive rules. We're going to throw out all the ISED issues involved here. If they're just going to go and this is just going to be, we're just going to streamline this and go ahead. I don't think so. It's going to remain in place. They might be able to play, and I've argued this for a long time over the years about defense procurement in this country. People say we need to reform this, we need to reform that. To be honest, forget it. You're not going to reform nothing. You're going to play in the margins, and you might be able to tweak things and get a little faster and a little quicker. But unless there's a sea change, and I just don't see that's going to happen in the case of the Canadian system. Yeah.
I believe I'm out of time. I had questions for the others as well, but I'll leave it to my colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mr. Baines, 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for joining us here today. I'm going to go to Mr. Hodgett first, please. Thank you for your service. And I wanted to talk a little bit about our defense ecosystem in Canada. We know we have around over 600 manufacturers in our defense ecosystem. How can we ensure that Canadian SMEs or new startups in the defense and national security sector remain a focus of national procurement strategy and they're not being sidelined by larger multinational firms?
Thank you very much for the question, and I very much look forward to my parliamentary doctorate in the mail. So there are many ways in which small and medium enterprise can be incentivized to A, join the space, but then B, stay in the space. A fantastic start is a review of the ITB system, right, that encourages a more effective collaboration between academia, between prime contractors, and with small and medium enterprise. Additionally, nationally mandated procurement requirements for small and medium business is an opportunity that has been talked about recently. Most importantly, the key to this is the provision of revenue to these companies in a way that actually gets them over what we in the technology industry refer to as the valley of death. It is very easy to get R&D money. It is very easy to get initial contracts that can get you to a point of productization. If the Crown is not willing to engage with small and medium enterprise in a way that allows them to sign contracts that exist for a known duration at a known value, then the opportunity space reduces significantly for companies to join. The last part of that would be the review of SHRED, right, and the applicability of SHRED, especially in the capital expenditure space, is a huge benefit to companies in the area. As soon as small companies start playing in defense hardware, defense software, larger scale capabilities, they are immediately priced out of the market purely due to the cost of those items. So being able to roll that into SHRED spending is an extremely powerful tool.
Staying on the capital side of things, we've heard in this committee before, we've talked about, and we've had people from the banking and financial sector talk about the stigma around capital lending, and the term debanked has come to the forefront. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that, and if you have experienced any of that in what you're doing, or and what are things that we as a government can do to ensure that there's the financial capital side of things to remove some of that stigma and assist with some of these new startups?
Absolutely. So private institutions, of course, have their own risk processes that they need to undergo, and fair enough. On the capital provider side, last year we were engaging initially with venture capitalists, so some of which said that defense was currently in the bucket of gambling and crypto trading. Obviously, we have a disagreement over that. In terms of banking itself, the reality is that because of it's not necessarily because of the stigma around defense. It is because in many cases the way the contracts are structured, i.e., usually 1 year plus option years, does not actually provide a capital provider the certainty where they can say, well, I know that you're going to be on contract for the next 3 years, so I'm willing to provide you with the loan that will carry you through this time, allow you to do that kind of an investment, right? So going back to my point, a significant boost to small and medium companies in the space would be sign the multi-year contracts up front. That allows for the certainty that they need. The second is when working with organizations like EDC and BDC, if there are opportunities to do things like enable, you've signed a $1 million contract with the Government of Canada to provide a capability, you are also entitled to, through BDC, a $200,000 capital loan that allows you to basically have the credit against that procurement vehicle. Those are some small efficiencies that could be found that would significantly increase the pace at which capital moves into the space.
Thank you. Maybe I'll stay with you for this one as well. How can industry and government collaborate to periodically reassess and update the capability priorities? So if we're talking about what you're mentioning here is service contracts need to be long term. How do we determine, okay, how long do we need this? There'll be continued evolving needs around the capabilities. So maybe expand on that.
My experience is that procurement requirements generally result from two levels. Either it's a strategic procurement of major capital capabilities, i.e. tanks, aircraft, ships, et cetera, infrastructure, or from the lowest levels possible where the actual end users are signaling requirements. I have very little exposure to the process by which major capital procurements are put in place or how those are prioritized, so I'm going to decline to comment on that component. What I can tell you is that any soldier is absolutely screaming every day of their life about what they want to stop using and what they do want to use. And so the ability for end users to have a direct say, and by delegating authorities, especially financial and procurement authorities, to the lowest levels possible, it will actually allow the trialing and eventually onboarding of capabilities much more quickly. That is much more suited to an innovation space as well. I would also say that the way that the government and that the military can support that is by using that as an opportunity to see what works quickly and then scale it across the institution, rather than to look at multi-year projects of how do we bring this on at the broadest scale possible and then push the requirements down.
Thanks. Mr. Saint-Marie, 6 minutes.
6 minutes for Mr. Saint-Marie. Welcome to all of the witnesses. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your presentations as well. I'll start with Professor Ferguson. Can you hear the interpretation? Is that allowing you to follow what I'm saying? Very good. Thank you. Now, you've criticised the government's choice to put on hold the purchase of the 88 F-35s and to see whether there could perhaps be a combination with the Gripen. You've said that's a very bad decision. Yesterday, the industry minister said to CBC, well, Saab is promising 10,000 jobs. How would you respond to her argument?
Well, the first response I would have is compare what she said to what I think it was the vice president of Lockheed Martin said about the thousands of jobs that have already been provided. The key question is you can provide 10,000, and the number, as far as I'm concerned, is sort of a rabbit pulled out of your hat. No one really knows until this moves forward. The question is not how many you can provide now or a year from now. It's how many you can provide that are going to be sustained over 10, 20, 30 years. And if you look simply, as I said, in terms of the numbers of access we have in the global marketplace, and I don't know what the arrangements with Saab would be, but I know what they are with the F-35 consortium. That's a huge market. And remember, these platforms are going to be in place if we take the F-18 example, we take the frigate example, for 40, or the Sea King example, for 40 or 50 years. And over that time, there'll be upgrades, modernization programs that are brought in, of course, the overall maintenance contracts that'll have to go. And with our companies that are involved with the F-35, what that means is not just dealing with 88 Canadians. That means we are engaged as long as we remain competitive. And I don't worry about that with our companies because they have always been competitive. The problem has always been getting access to the global market. You now have a global market for the next 40 years to maintain that job base, depending, of course, on technology and labor versus technology resolutions. But that's the long term. So in my view, the F-35 already in the bird in the hand provides us with a long-term sustainable capability for Canadian defense industry with a global access to a global marketplace, which is going to expand, I would suggest, over time, and which is really doing what we want to do with a defense industrial strategy. The Gripen side of the equation is, in my view, a big question mark, but it's never going to be as big, and it's not going to be last, and it's not going to be sustained, in my view.
Merci beaucoup. Vos propos sont très clairs.
Thank you very much. That's crystal clear. You've talked about commitments for upgrades and so on for several decades, stretching out to 40 or 50 years. We heard from Mr. Foster in the first hour as one of our witnesses from L3 Harris that does the maintenance on the F-18s. And today in La Presse, the Quebec newspaper, there was an article where they were saying that with these decisions from the government to perhaps order Gripen, then it's the future of this company that's in peril. And in the short term, half of the jobs could go. So there's strategic military questions. What should we do with the equipment that we have? And then, of course, the industrial benefits and spin-offs. And you're saying there would be more industrial benefits in partnership with the F-35s, in particular because we would have access to the global market. So do you have comments on maintaining jobs at L3 Harris and Mirabel?
Exactly. And it's not there. It's Magellan Aerospace in Winnipeg. And I don't have a list of the companies. I believe it's 30 Canadian companies are involved in this. And if anyone here thinks that we buy the Gripen, that this won't have implications for their firms, that the Americans will decide, who are the lead on this, decide, you're not buying, we're going to now push you out. And they'll all go. I'm convinced of it. And even more, which we don't talk about, is the strategic political implications. How will the U.S. Department of Defense, and I'm not telling you we should be kowtowing to the Americans, but how are they going to respond to this? What does this mean to them? What does it mean for the companies when suddenly we're signaling to them that, well, we still want access to your market through the DPSA, but by the way, the deal we struck back in 1956, in which Canadian companies would be treated like American companies in DoD procurement, in return that we would buy their major military systems from the United States. And there's been exceptions, and those have been understandable for a variety of reasons in terms of product capability at the time, that they're just simply going to sit by and say, oh, that's fine, we don't mind. I don't think that's a proper reading and understanding of the American administration. And if you're going to go down this path, and this is the broader path, and I'll end here, the broader path in terms of diversifying into the European marketplace and the Asia-Pacific partners, despite the agreements we've signed with them, with our very nice agreements, there's no meat on them at all. We don't know what they really mean. If they cannot promise access to a global market to their procurement systems, it's not worth going down that path at all. We'll get nowhere. And even then, if we go down, they promise access. You got to remember, over the past decades, when we've gone to the Europeans, they've talked about this. The Europeans is as protectionist as everyone else is. And they're going to privilege their companies, not us, at the end of the day.
Encore une fois, c'est très... Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you. Once again, that was very clear. Thank you, Chair.
Yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. For Dr. Hubert, the F-35 is used by 19 non-U.S. partners. The integration with allies is a necessity. Could you explain the importance of choosing the F-35?
Absolutely. Thank you. Again, I'll start off with the reality. As we are going through this discussion, people are saying, are we going to get the 10,000 jobs from Saab? Are we going to somehow escape, as Dr. Ferguson says, the American wrath when and if we were to do it? But what misses is the core of your question. What is the strategic purpose of getting the F-35 or the Gripen for that matter? The reason why we see from a strategic perspective, why Norway, why Finland, why Denmark have all made the decision about going for the F-35 is the manner in which it fights and meets the expected enemy. And I mean, let's face it, we are talking about meeting a potential conflict with Russia. And so the reason why these countries are saying we want to go with the F-35 and why it has such an international appeal is, of course, you are talking about trying to respond to a new battlefield, one in which the new type of weapon systems, and it's referred to in both our defense update and the Arctic foreign policy, the stealth and speed of the new missile systems are such that the old days of tactical war fighting, those are gone in any major war. We're talking about a very different type of ability to respond and defend. The reason why the F-35 is put at the forefront is it is a fifth generation that is dedicated to a system response. In other words, it's not just simply one aircraft being out there and being able to dogfight with a Russian aircraft or a Chinese aircraft, because those are the two enemies identified in the defense update. But you're talking about being able to talk to each other, know where the threat is coming, when in fact the threat is speeding at about 1,000 kilometers or even faster. And so in order to engage in that war environment, and this is what Canadians always have such difficulty trying to think about, we buy weapons because we may be at war. And as our defense update says, that possibility has increased. And so therefore the F-35 works with our allies. It is integrated to a level that the open literature suggests that the Griffin isn't. And I'll add one other factor that hasn't come into the discussion yet. If we find ourselves actually at war with the Russians, what does any Canadian really think that the Swedes are ever going to be able to resupply any damage or loss that we suffer in that conflict? I mean, the reality is that the Swedes, as soon as if that conflict goes kinetic, forget about any resupply from the Swedes. They will be dealing with a frontline attack from the Russians. And so therefore, even thinking again, rather than whether or not Montreal, Winnipeg, or whatever municipalities are going to be getting the weapons, you have to be thinking, how is the best way to maintain ourselves in a war? And a resupply from Sweden simply is not going to happen in such an event.
Thank you. Do you agree that procuring F-35s would help with recruitment of fighter pilots?
We've got to do something about fighter pilots. This is one of the frustrations we in academia face, is that we hear from all of our colleagues, we hear from people just how badly the number of pilots that we have been allowed to deteriorate. And this is why we have such difficulty engaging in this conversation. Would pilots come? Pilots are going to come if, in fact, you give them any platform. We know that when we got the CF-5. I mean, that was clearly an inferior fighter that was made for particularly political reasons rather than for strategic reasons. The pilots are pilots. They're going to say, fine, we're going to come in. Now, if you get the F-35, the advantage of that is, of course, the technological challenges are such that appeals to the type of mentality, the Billy Flynns, the Stephen Furrs that want to be fighter pilots and coming in. And so, I mean, if you talk to Stephen or Billy and say, okay, does it matter if it's an F-35 or if it's a Griffin, as long as I can be a pilot, that would be the first response. And if I think you asked him, okay, if you had a choice, which are the two that you would pick, I think you'd probably find them both going for the higher technology as pilots, not as politicians.
Thanks so much.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Madame O'Rourke, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Carr. Again, I'm going to reiterate my amazement. The federal budget 2025 proposes historic investments in defense because of the position that we are hearing our witnesses describe. And what we're hearing across the way is, well, how quickly can we buy these planes and how can we recruit more people? And just on Monday, they voted against that. So I just want to state my profound discomfort with a lot of the conversation. I also wanted to say, with respect to the F-35, like we are here for a broader conversation on the whole defense industrial strategy, not just on the F-35s. But President Trump said publicly he would reduce capacity for F-35s by 10%, and that his tariffs on Canada, which are part of our conversation about finding other trading partners, those tariffs on critical minerals like aluminum put a huge strain on the F-35 supply chain in Canada, with the intent of bringing Canadian jobs to the U.S., and we have no reason to believe that would not continue. So those are practical, realistic concerns. I don't believe those are emotional concerns. So I'd like to park that for the moment because we're deep in a procurement conversation here when really the topic is the broader defense industrial strategy. So I had a question for Mr. Hodgett. We had a witness here a few weeks ago who told us about plans to create a defense bank that is a multinational bank. And do you think that that would be helpful, and what consideration should we be thinking about in that regard?
The Defense Security Resilience Bank is, in concept, a very effective way of securing the overall capital buttressing, I guess you could say, for large-scale providers. There is no doubt that that organization and its flow-throughs to the major banks would be an extremely powerful capability in terms of enabling a greater depth of wallet that allows for these organizations to accept more risk in things like deep tech, defense procurement, and some of the more capital-intensive capabilities that come with the defense industrial strategy. So it is very likely that having that organization, especially if it was centered in Canada, would not only increase the amount of defense investment, but would also attract a significant amount of additional tech talent and intellectual property into the country, as it would be a magnet for organizations that seek high amounts of capital in order to create very high-tech capabilities. Hope that answers your question.
It does, thanks. And the goal here is to make recommendations on the defense industrial strategy. So if that's a new source of capital, then it should be explored. I'm curious, so Canada obviously is trying to diversify our defense partnerships beyond the United States, but not excluding the United States, obviously. We're highly integrated with the U.S. through NORAD and international traffic in arms regulations, controlled supply chains. So how does that reliance on U.S. markets shape the opportunities and risks facing Canadian defense companies? And how can Canada balance the advantages of that U.S. market through NORAD with the need to diversify into other allied emerging markets? And I'm going to direct my question to Dr. Hubert.
Well, thank you very much. And I think that at the heart of your question is the realization that the North American continent needs to be defended, of course, by the two North American countries. Now, the problem, and to a certain degree, it comes from your opening commentary, of course, of the challenges we're facing with Trump. There is no question whatsoever that Trump has posed one of the most difficult challenges to the Canadian-U.S. defense relationship that we've had since the 1940 Ordnance Agreement was reached between the two countries. The reality is that, on the other hand, the threats that we are facing from both China and Russia start developing. We can see the weapon technology back to 2008. And as we try to respond and meet to it, we have to say, okay, we've got the Americans that are very destabilizing under Trump. No question whatsoever. The supply chain, all the very good things that you said are very true. But Trump will be gone in 3 years, or he will be dictator, in which case that completely changes our defense relationship with the Americans. And that's part of the reality. Now, the point of how NORAD cooperation is working is the fact that we will, regardless if Trump is a dictator or is he gone in 3 years, we will still be facing the ongoing growing strategic threat that Russia and China face. And I suspect that what that will cause is that Americans will come back to the realization that, yes, to protect themselves, they have to work with us. Now, this is something that Trump has done very significant damage to, but it will return us. Now, getting back to the crux of your question, the NORAD modernization, as was released in that Globe and Mail story that talks about how much Canada is participating already with Northern Shield into their Northern Shield into their Golden Shield, illustrates this understanding, and that is going to have to drive a lot of the cooperation and business opportunities at the same time, because that threat will exist. regardless of the overlay of the politics. The question is whether or not the politics and the reaction to these 3 years of Trump does enough damage to actually do a favor for our enemies in that context.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Saint-Marie, 2 minutes 30 secondes.
Monsieur le Président, on a...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We've got 2 or even 3 university professors here. I don't have much time, so I'll start with Mr. Hubert online and then Mr. Ferguson, and if there's still time, Mr. Hodgett, on the contribution of universities to the objectives with this new defence industrial strategy, and what is the role of Borealis, you think, in all that? So for about a minute, Mr. Hubert, and then the others, please, on Borealis.
I mean, Borealis demonstrates the fact that the universities, if they're properly engaged, are dying to get into this discussion. I see this at my university. I see the discussions both amongst the social scientists who have continued and who did very well, by the way, by the former program of the Security Defense Forum that provided us the means into that. But at the same token, with the arrival of Borealis, with the government taking this serious, I see my science and STEM colleagues very interested in raising this issue. A, they do important work on it, and B, they believe in the context of being able to provide for Canadian security. So anywhere where government can provide this type of leadership is something that has to be encouraged but sustained.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Ferguson, avez-vous...
Thank you, Mr. Ferguson. Do you have comments to add?
I want to make 2 quick comments. Defense products moving from Canada to the United States are tariff-free. There are no tariffs on them. Exactly how critical materials and aluminum and steel tariffs in the commercial sector apply when you get into the defense world, I don't have the answer to that. But be very careful to think that those follow. It's a different situation. Secondly, I would like someone to give me some evidence why our relationship, defense relationship with the United States has been hurt at all, despite the tariffs and Trump's announcements. There's no evidence of that. You talk to DND, you talk to Canadian military personnel in NORAD, everywhere. Defense cooperation continues outside, or what I call under the radar. Now, to your question, very briefly, before this came out, the interest of universities in defense, security, and spending was 0. They couldn't care less. Now they smell money. Let me be blunt. They smell money that can be used, and that's what they're interested in. Turn the tap off, and they will go back to where they were before. And I'm sure my colleague Rob Hubert knows this. They're keen now. They weren't keen in the past. I worked with them trying to get support for the university for our research and our centers. We got nothing. We said, great work, thanks, but go away, don't bother us. That's the reality. And I understand that reality. It's the way the world works.
Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Donc, merci à vous 3.
Thank you very much to all 3 of you.
5 minutes to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're good.
It's on?
You're
It's
good.
on? My question is to Mr. Ferguson. Our U.S.-Canada relationships are at an all-time low. We've got increased tariffs, new tariffs. Everything we do angers the Americans. Digital service tax, ads running on American networks that was characterized as foreign interference. But what kind of a message are we sending to America when we talk about buying jet fighters from Sweden, namely the Griffin? And you commented on a little bit on this earlier. What kind of a message are we sending to our American counterparts?
We have to be very careful to confuse or spill over the general economic and political issues surrounding our relationship with the United States from the defense relationship with the United States. For decades, that relationship with the United States has been very close. Politically, no one's really pays attention to it. It doesn't run at the executive level. I doubt that President Trump has any idea about the defense level of defense cooperation. DOD knows. And despite the problems politically and economically on the commercial civilian side, etc., the defense relationship continues to work. And we cannot allow that part, the problems we have, to spill into that relationship. Or let me put it bluntly to you. we can't awaken Trump to this. Because if you do, we all know how he just goes off the deep end every now and then. And I always tell everyone, stop listening to Donald Trump. Don't listen to him anymore. See what the Americans are doing. And on the defense cooperation level, wherever we go, has continued to move along as it's always moved along. So I don't think this is a problem unless we make it a problem. And if we make it a problem, you will get a response. And it won't be in our interests. The Americans will act in their interests, and for now, the United States DOD, the military, the defense world in the United States believes Canada is a vital partner in the defense of North America. And as long as we keep that insulated, this will continue. Integration with them will continue, because we are integrated with them. We have to recognize that. It's reality.
Because of licensing, the U.S. has the ability to block export sales of the Gripen to other countries. And that includes the motor that drives this jet. And I'm not talking really about the efficiency of having an agreement to buy F-35s. But if we do anger the American government again through some other mechanism, apart from the tariffs and the digital service tax and the ads, for instance, you make it clear if Trump finds out that we anger them again, and then we find out that we're going to buy a Gripen from Sweden, is there going to be an issue with licensing, with Canada buying a Gripen fighter jet from Sweden?
You are correct. As far as I understand, the Gripen uses U.S. engines, which are under U.S. export controls. And therefore, with those engines, where the Gripen gets sold will be under U.S. export controls. And they have to follow the licenses that the Americans, with consequences. Important to understand, with regards to our relationship with the United States, we aren't under, or we don't need, normally export controls has to go from department to State Department and then the process there. We are exempt from that. They have reliable and trust in our export controls, so those goods come back and forth because we're similar on these things. It makes a much more amenable environment for Canadian industries because we get exempt on lots of things. We get treated differently. And there's always hiccups in this. It's always been little things, hiccups, Congress gets involved, etc. But no matter what you do, we have to recognize American technology is under American export controls. And companies at their peril violate those controls, and there'll be implications. As for your final point, I don't know what the punishment would be. I don't know how the United States would treat this. They may know nothing about it. Companies will be concerned about investments here, about reliability on our part. The real question is not American reliability. Sometimes I start to think it's our reliability. How trustworthy, which we have been, are we going to be, and what's the impact? I can't predict this. But there's enough indicators to think that there's going to be concerns. And that independent of buying the F-35, there are simply strategic economic reasons why we need to buy that and not have two supply chains. That's a major waste of money.
That's it, 5 minutes, right? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Yeah.
Madame Macan, final 5 minutes to you.
Mr. Hubert, considering the F-35's lockdown operating architecture and limiting the ability for domestic modifications or incorporate domestic technology without relying on external partners, basically F-35 is essentially a flying computer, and Canada does not have access to the source code. This means Canada cannot independently modify the software, update the threat libraries, or fix bugs without U.S. permission or assistance. Could you clarify to what extent Canada can independently implement changes or customizations to these systems?
Well, your point answers itself. We have limited ability to do it on our own, and that's the whole design of this technology. But the reason why the technology is developed in that context, of course, is that the Americans ran into certain difficulties of some of their technology from their F-22s getting into the hands of their adversaries. What we have to come back to is, okay, theoretically, the Americans could cut off this technology. But again, we come back to the central point that we're heading into a much more dangerous international environment where the physical protection of North America is increasingly becoming into question. And so ultimately, what balances any theoretical discussion that, yes, the Americans have the theoretical ability to cut off the supply of that information from their own personal domestic requirements, why would they do that? If ultimately they are trying to defend North America and that they have realized the growing threat from the new weapon technologies, particularly the missiles that both the Chinese and the Russians have, there is really little way of understanding any motivations for the Americans to turn around and say, okay, we're not going to let we're not going to let the Norwegians or the Finns or the Danes or the Canadians to have this technology. So as long as the international system is becoming more and more dangerous, even with somebody such as Trump in charge, the Americans have no motivation whatsoever for cutting that off in the event of a growing crisis, and everybody agrees that we are facing that growing crisis.
Thank you very much, but it's still based on somebody else's decision at the end of the day. So, Mr. Hubert, I'm not a military expert, and I don't have a preference based on the systems, but as a defense professional they have the expertise on that. But based on my quick calculation, for a hypothetical fleet of 88 fighter aircraft operating over 50-year lifespan with an average of 180 flight hours per aircraft per year, the total life cycle operating cost appears to be approximately $26 billion for the F-35s compared to $6 billion for the Saab Gripen. From an industry and defense perspective, could you comment on the factors driving this difference in operating cost and how these figures should influence procurement and long-term fleet management decisions?
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question. One of the problems we face, though, is it's very difficult to get a proper understanding of those terms. If you trace how the Auditor General, for example, has tried to come up, for example, with full life costing of what these units are, and of course now there's pushback saying, well, full life costing doesn't take into effect what military units have to do. And so I would stand your question saying, okay, from an economic perspective, I don't know if I can say enough on the specific numbers to have a confidence, but my question would be, out of those two, which is the one more likely to provide Canadian security in the event of a war? In other words, we have to look at what we're buying defense equipment for, and it is to either deter or to fight a war. And so we're left with the situation, perhaps the argument may emerge that over an entire 50-year period, the Saab ends up being cheaper. But two assumptions have to come forward, and that is that, in fact, we don't have a war in that period with the Chinese and the Russians. And second of all, ultimately, the ability to deter those two countries from fighting, which of these two weapon systems are going to be better at doing it? And for me, that becomes the important question, rather than can we figure out in a 50-year life cycle which one ultimately is going to have cost us the most?
Thank you very much for your answers.
That's about it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you, colleagues. Witnesses, thank you for availing yourselves to us today and contributing to our study here on defense industrial strategy. Colleagues, hope you have a great rest of your week. We will see you again on Monday. Meeting adjourned.